Welcome back to The Corner, your number one spot for everything fantasy basketball related. Today, we're breaking down the top 50 players for week 3, the ones who are set to dominate their matchups and carry your team to a win. If these players are on your roster, you're in for a huge week. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss anything that I post. Every move counts in fantasy, and staying one step ahead of your competition starts right here. Now let's get into the video. Heading into week 3, the matchups are everything. I've spent the last few days of my life breaking down every single schedule, analyzing which players have the most favorable matchups, and figuring out who's going to carry your team to victory this week. Last week, I warned you guys about Cade Cunningham and the brutal schedule that the Pistons had, and we're doing the same thing again this week. So let's buckle up, because this one's going to be a little bit longer than usual, but packed with info that can give you the edge in your league. This list was built using ESPN's default scoring system along with sleepers position designations to make sure there's no overlap between player groups. That means you're getting the top 10 players from each position minus anyone who's currently sidelined with injury. And before we dive into the rankings, here's how the tiers break down. The S tier players are going to be the true superstars, the guys that are capable of putting up 240 plus fantasy points in a single week. A tier players fall in the 200 to 239 points range. B tier 150 to 199, C tier is 125 to 149, D tier is 100 to 124, and the E tier players are going to be players who can definitely hit 100 points plus, but they are highly dependent on the matchups that week or the opportunity of someone else getting hurt on their team. So keep that in mind. This isn't just about talent, it's about who's in the best position to dominate this current week. All right, so kicking off the S tier, we have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and he is in a dream spot this week with 4 games total, so him getting to 240 should be an easy task. With 3 of them coming against some of the worst defensive teams in the league, that combination of volume and weak matchups is exactly what you want from a superstar. Shai should have no problem stuffing the stat sheet and putting up around 60 to 70 fantasy points a night with ease. If he's on your roster, you're in for a massive week this week. Next on the list, we have Steph Curry, and Steph Curry, last time I had him in a B tier along with Jimmy Butler, and he quickly reminded me why that was a mistake. The Warriors face a stretch of very soft defensive matchups this week, and that spells trouble for the opposing teams and for anyone who is playing against Steph this week. When Steph gets rhythm and spacing, he's nearly unstoppable. If he stays healthy, expects a barrage of threes and a ton of fantasy points. He's cooking again this week. Giannis Antetokounmpo, and there's really not much to say about this one. He's unstoppable right now. There's no one in the NBA who can stop him. He's averaging 36 and 16 at the time of me recording this video, and that is almost impossible to fathom to start a season. And every time he steps onto the court, he's a threat for a triple-double, and it doesn't look like he's slowing down anytime soon. So Giannis is locked into the S tier production, especially with a 4-game week. It's pure dominance week after week. Next, we have the alien himself, Victor Wembanyama, and he has put the league on notice. Right now, he's averaging about 5 blocks per game and is already breaking fantasy basketball. Wemby is one of the only players this season so far to go over 240 fantasy points in a single week with just 3 games. He is unreal. His defensive impact is crazy, and at this point, he's matchup proof. If you got Wemby, you've got a weekly cheat code. And next, we have another one of those players who is capable of putting up 240 all in 3 games, but he has not yet done it this year, Nikola Jokic. And honestly, there's just really no one in the league who can slow him down. He's an absolute fantasy monster every time he steps onto the floor. And with 3 favorable matchups this week and only the Heat offering some type of real resistance when it comes to their team defense, expect Jokic to go full scorched earth mode the entire week. He is a lock for massive numbers across the board, and if you're facing him this week, good luck to you. And kicking off the A tier is Tyrese Maxey, and he has taken a complete nether leap this season, and honestly, it's hard for me to believe after how good he was last year. Now paired with VJ Edgecombe, Maxey looks completely unlocked in the 76ers offense. He can drop 40 points on any given night, and his confidence is completely skyrocketed this year. Expect around 50 fantasy points per game this week, no matter who he faces. Well, except for maybe Cleveland. Cleveland's guard defense is completely unreal so far this year, so they may actually slow him down, but I still expect around 30 to 40 points from him that night. Jamal Murray has quietly been one of the most consistent fantasy basketball players so far this year. He's averaging around 52 fantasy points per game, and the weird thing about it is that it's so quiet. that since the Nuggets play so late at night here on the East Coast, he's flying under the radar, but that won't last long. With him having 4 guard-friendly matchups this week on the schedule, you can expect a few explosive performances, and don't be surprised if Murray drops multiple 60-point games this week. Donovan Mitchell remains one of the most dangerous scorers in basketball. He can get buckets from anywhere on the court, and once he catches fire, there's almost nothing anyone can do to slow him down. This week, he's got a great stretch of games going against Philly, Washington, and Chicago, all of which should allow him to thrive offensively. And Darius Garland is expected to return soon if he has not already, but that doesn't change much. Mitchell is still going to have the green light on the offense and should also post some really big fantasy totals throughout this week. Next, we have Julius Randle, and without Anthony Edwards, it has been no problem at all. With Anthony Edwards sidelined, I fully expect Julius Randle to take control of the offense and shoulder both of the scoring and playmaking load. He's going to be the focal point in almost every single possession with Edwards on the sideline. Expect some monster stat lines and a few highlight-worthy games for Randle this week. He's about to remind everyone just how dominant he can be when he's the number one option. The start of this season for Kevin Durant has been a bit streaky so far, but this looks like the week he finally finds his rhythm. The Rockets face 4 potential playoff teams, and if they want to come out of this stretch with an even record, they'll definitely need Kevin Durant to turn back into the Slim Reaper. So I expect him to lock in and take over offensively and put up vintage Durant numbers all week long. Anthony Davis is just a D at this point. On pure talent alone, he should be an S tier player. But as always, it's going to come down to his availability. When he's locked in and healthy, he is a walking 60-point to 70-point fantasy performance every single night. So I expect big games across the board for AD this week, rebounds, blocks, and plenty of scoring, but I don't think he crosses over into that 240-point tier. The big man from Houston, Alperen Sengun, has shown flashes of being one of the most skilled offensive centers in the league. When he's on, he can shoot, pass, and score with anyone. But the problem is his consistency. He'll have dominant stretches followed by nights where he just completely disappears. And just like KD, if the Rockets want to come out of this tough week with a winning record, they'll need Sengun to lock in and play like a cold-blooded killer on both ends of the floor. And kicking off the B tier, we have James Harden, the Beard. We're moving into the B tier, and Harden fits perfectly as the first person in this new rank. Gone are the days when he could drop 50 points in his sleep with no type of effort, but he's reinvented himself as more of a floor general in LA. Expect his steady 30 to 50 fantasy points a night, but those vintage outbursts are far and few between now, so he's going to be locked into the B tier. With Tyrese Haliburton now out, Pascal Siakam is carrying a much bigger load for the Pacers, and this week's schedule sets him up nicely. The first half of the week features some soft matchups where he should absolutely feast on the defenses, but things get tougher down the stretch with some games against the Nuggets and the Warriors. Expect some huge fantasy nights early on, followed by a slight taper as the week wraps up. Austin Reeves has really proven his value to the Lakers, stepping up in a huge way with Luka's sideline. He has been efficient, confident, and producing across multiple categories. If Luka's absence extends past the 1 week, Reeves easily jumps into that A-tier production this week with expanded usage and scoring opportunities. But if Luka does return and everything is fine, I expect him to settle into the upper end of the B tier range. He's still productive, just with a smaller share of the offense. The last time I talked about this player, I said this, and I'll say it again. If this rookie keeps climbing the ladder, he is going to be an insane fantasy player. And right now, VJ Edgecombe is averaging around 50 fantasy points per game as a rookie. This is putting him right at the top of the B tier, but with 4 games this week, he's got a real shot to break into the A tier. The Maxey and Edgecombe combo has been flat out unfair for any team that they played against, and if the chemistry keeps building, his rise is only getting started. Next up, we have Jalen Brunson, the star point guard for New York, and this is the definition of a very streaky superstar. When he's hot, he can stay hot for what feels like days, but when he's cold, he's absolutely nothing seems to fall. Jalen Brunson is a high volume shooter, which means he can light up the court, but he can also tank your team's field goal percentage with how many shots he's taking if he's off. With only 3 matchups this week, I just can't see him clearing 170 fantasy points, so he's going to be solidly in this B tier. And that leads us to Norman Powell. He has become the de facto #1 scoring option in Miami, because when he goes, the team goes. And that said, his upside, it feels capped this week. Just due to the limited offensive help and some tougher matchups ahead, expect some efficient scoring nights with solid production across the board, but I just can't see him surpassing 200 fantasy points this week, so this will keep him comfortably in the middle of his B tier range. Franz Wagner is currently the only member of the Magic's new trio who's already found his rhythm since Desmond Bane has joined the team, and that's likely why he's the lone Magic player on this list. While the rest of the roster is still adjusting, Franz has stayed consistent, doing a bit of everything on both ends. Expect him to stay in his usual 25 to 40 fantasy points per game range, which should add up to around 160 to 170 points, marking another steady and productive stretch for Wagner. Jimmy Butler has settled nicely into his role with Golden State, no longer needing to be the number one option like he was in Miami, but fully capable of taking over when Steph has an off night. That balance has made him more efficient, but it also caps his fantasy ceiling. With the fully healthy Warriors squad, you can expect Butler to hover around 150 to 170 fantasy points this week. Steady, reliable production, just without those explosive top tier nights. Jaylen Brown has always been a bit of an enigma. The talent and opportunity are definitely there, but he rarely manages to put it all together consistently. This week though, Boston's schedule is pretty soft, giving him a chance to shine. I'm expecting one monster performance from Brown, with his other games leaning closer to his usual 30 points per night, putting him right in line for a solid if somewhat streaky kind of week. The Pelicans have a very tough schedule this week, facing a few dangerous teams, the Spurs being the biggest challenge. Zion Williamson has already shown that he can hold his own against them and Wemby, and I expect more of the same this time around. This should be a classic Zion week, strong finishes at the rim, efficient shooting, and plenty of boards, totaling around 150 fantasy points by week's end if he does play with the foot injury. Kawhi Leonard, when healthy, is still absolutely dominant. One of the few players who can flirt with S-tier production, even in his slightly diminished form. That said, for this week, I see him landing at the lower end of the B tier. He'll still give you a strong two-way numbers and efficient scoring, but with some tough matchups and minutes management likely in play, I don't expect his ceiling to hit that elite level just yet at this point of the season. Scottie Barnes has the tools to be an elite playmaker and scorer. He's shown flashes of both early in the season. However, with only 3 games on the schedule this week, his chances to make a major fantasy impact are limited. That keeps him firmly locked in the B tier, still productive but without enough volume to push any higher. The big walk himself. Walker Kessler is one of the most matchup dependent bigs in fantasy basketball. He dominates weaker centers but tends to struggle against stronger and more physical ones. This week he'll face the Celtics, Pistons, and Timberwolves, which gives him a mix of both. Still, with those matchups, he should be able to average around 50-ish fantasy points per game, putting together a solid, well-rounded week of production. Nikola Jokic is one of those players who can be red hot one night and then ice cold the next, making him a bit unpredictable week to week. With only 3 games on the schedule, his volume is limited, but his consistency on the boards and scoring touch should carry him through. I expect him to crack the 150 point mark this week, giving you a steady mid-tier fantasy production. And kicking off the C tier, we have LaMelo Ball. And Melo is a pure hooper. There's just no question about it. He's capable of exploding on any given night. With only 2 games on the schedule this week and both coming against tough defensive matchups, it's unlikely that he'll have the volume needed to break out. Expect solid performances, but I just don't see Melo topping the 120 fantasy points this week. Keontae George has been putting up a clinic with Isaiah Collier out so far. But as of now, Collier is expected to return to the lineup, so I am making this video with the expectation that Collier is playing come Monday. That's going to cut into George's scoring opportunities and overall usage, likely bringing his production back down to earth starting this week. Trey Jones has been one of the few bright spots on this young Bulls team so far this year, and that trend should continue. However, with only 3 games on the schedule and some tough matchups against the Bucks and the Cavs to close out the week, it's shaping up to be a challenging stretch for Trey Jones. Expect steady production, but just don't anticipate any huge breakout performances. The scoring hierarchy in Sacramento is all over the place right now, and this is what's making DeMar DeRozan's fantasy output just really tough to predict. His points can swing wildly from night to night depending on who gets hot, and for this week though, with the current matchups and rotation balance, I just don't see him producing enough to move past the C tier, and this same thing is going to go for Zach LaVine as well. Derek White is expected to be a key piece for the Celtics all season thanks to Jason Tatum's injury, and so far that's gone about as well as anyone could have hoped. His fantasy numbers have been volatile though, some big nights followed by quieter ones. With a soft schedule this week, he's got a chance to put up solid numbers, but hitting 125 fantasy points just feels a little bit like a stretch. RJ Barrett has been on a tear so far to start off the season, carrying over the momentum he built at the end of last year. He's looked confident, aggressive, and efficient on both ends of the floor. With the rhythm he's in right now, you can expect 30 to 40 fantasy points per night as he continues his strong start. Lottie Markkinen is finally starting to look like his old self again after returning from his enlistment. Lottie, he dropped 51 points last week. It is now heading into a stretch of games against softer interior defenses, the perfect setup for him to dominate. Expect Lottie to feast all week long, averaging around 55 fantasy points per game as he continues to regain his all-star form. Evan Mobley has picked up right where he left off last season, continuing to expand his game beyond just being a traditional big. He's contributing across the board with points, rebounds, assists, and blocks, making him a true multi-category force in fantasy. Expect a big-time production from Mobley this week, with his totals likely nearing that 150-point mark. Chet Holmgren is one of those players who always feels like he's on the verge of breaking out and finally being a superstar, but his fantasy ceiling usually hovers around 40-ish points. Sure, he'll have nights where he goes way above that, but more often than not, that's where he tops out. And that limitation keeps him from reaching his true elite status. He's consistent, he's efficient, but until he starts stringing together those big 50+ point games, his upside remains capped. Kicking off the D tier, we have Mikal Bridges. This is New York's Iron Man, and he continues to do a bit of everything and almost never misses a game. His reliability is unmatched, but with only 3 matchups this week, his fantasy ceiling is going to be limited. I don't see him surpassing 125 fantasy points, keeping him firmly in that D tier for now. Next up, we have the man Jrue Holiday. Now in Portland, Jrue Holiday has been playing some incredible basketball to open up the season. Around 35 fantasy points per game, his steady production should continue into this week, but with only 3 games and limited upside, I expect him to finish within this D tier range of player. Next up on this list, we have Cole Anthony. He has really embraced his backup point guard role in Milwaukee, and the fact that he's cracked the top 50 list pretty much says it all. He's been a steady all-around contributor, doing a little bit of everything to keep the offense flowing. Expect consistent performances in the 25 to 30 point range this week, especially when Kevin Porter Jr. doesn't return back from the ankle injury. Next, we have the boy Keyshawn George, and the Wizards have fully committed to their youth movement, and Keyshawn George is at the center of it. Like most young players, he's had some off nights, but when he's locked in, it's must-watch basketball. With 4 games on the schedule this week, I expect him to average around 30 fantasy points per night, continuing to showcase his growth and upside. And this is going to be the Kings' 3rd player on this top 50 list. That is with Malik Monk. His fantasy value is all about matchup and opportunity. When the other scorers are cold, Monk can light it up from the bench and carry the offense, but when they're hot, his role shrinks fast. Expect some boom or bust production from him this week, being heavily dependent on how the rest of the team perform. If Benedict Mathurin is fully healthy, I'd expect him to put up numbers close to the B tier, given his scoring ability and growing role. However, with him dealing with an injury, there's a real chance he misses some time, and missed games mean fewer opportunities to rack up good points. For now, the uncertainty keeps him locked into the D tier for this week. Aaron Gordon started the season on fire, but let's be real, that pace is not going to be sustainable. He still have a good game or 2 this week, especially in favorable matchups, but overall, I expect his production to cool off and look for him to finish this week under 100 fantasy points as things even back out to his usual output. My favorite team, the Miami Heat, have fully embraced a team-oriented approach to start off the season, where any player can step up on any night and lead the scoring. That includes Jaime Jaquez Jr., who's proven he can contribute in multiple ways. Expect him to score efficiently, move the ball, and to create for others. He's not just an option anymore, he's a key part of Miami's balanced attack. Kristaps Porzingis. A healthy unicorn means big-time fantasy production. He can fill the stat sheet with points, rebounds, and blocks when he's on the floor, but as always, availability is going to be the main concern for Kristaps. The constant risk of missed games keeps him at the bottoms of these lists, despite his elite upside when healthy. And finally, to finish off the D tier, we have Alex Sarr, who is starting to find his rhythm after a shaky rookie season. When he's on, he can completely light up the floor, but when he's off, it can get rough really fast. The Wizards had 4 games this week and 3 coming against some really tough defensive teams, which could make things difficult for him. I expect a bit of an up and down stretch, landing Sarr in the D tier, hovering around 100 fantasy points for the week. For the E tier, all 3 of these players have managed to crack the top 50 in rankings, but they're definitely on thin ice. Their recent success is mostly tied to temporary increases in minutes or opportunities created by injuries. If they can stay healthy, I still expect them to contribute some solid counting stats like points, boards, or defensive rebounds, but their roles could shrink fast once their teams get back to full strength. This has been the top 50 rankings for the week 3 of fantasy basketball. Use these to guide your matchups and get that edge this week when you're playing against your opponents in your league. Thanks for stopping by the corner. If you enjoyed this video, I know that you'll love this one as well. And as always, I see you in the next one. Peace out.